I left the pack on the night of the harvest moon, when every wolf with a name was inside the great hall, and no one was watching the western gate. I did not write a letter. I had spent 4 years learning that letters were for people whose absence would be noticed, and I had finally, mercifully, stopped being one of those people. I was 21 then. I am 25 now, and I am telling you this from the only house I have ever owned, so you already know it did not end the way the gate made it feel. The cottage sat at the far edge of the Iron Territories, in the band of forest that belonged to no pack because no pack wanted it, too rocky to farm, too far from the river, too close to the border to be safe. I had wanted exactly that. I built it with my own hands over 2 summers, which is to say, I built it badly the first summer and correctly the second, and I learned the difference by standing in the rain inside my own kitchen. I planted a garden. I learned which of the forest mushrooms would feed me and which would end the conversation entirely. I set a second chair at my table, and I do not know to this day why I did that. Except that a table with 1 chair is a table that has given up. And I had not given up. I had only left. For 5 years, I told myself those were the same thing. They were not. The morning he came, I was kneeling in the dirt with my hands full of onion tops, and the wind changed, and I knew, before I heard a single footstep, the way you know a storm is coming by the smell of the air before the sky agrees. Pine, iron, hearth smoke that did not come from my hearth. I did not turn around. I want to be honest about that, because it is the part I am least proud of, and the part that matters most. I knelt in my own garden with my back to the forest, and I closed my eyes, and I thought, very clearly, if I do not turn around, it is not real, and I can keep this. Wren. He said my name the way you set down something you have carried a long way and are afraid to break. I turned around. Soren, king of the Iron Territories, strongest wolf alive, the man whose hall I had walked out of without a word, was standing at the edge of my garden in a travelling cloak gone grey with road dust, looking at my cottage as though it had spoken to him. He looked older, not weaker. Soren did not do weaker, but worn in a way the crown had not managed in all the years I served in his halls. There was grey at his temple that had not been there. His hands were empty, which, on a king, is its own kind of statement. "You found it," I said. I want to tell you I said something clever. I had, over 5 years, composed perhaps 40 things to say to him if this impossible morning ever arrived, and every one of them was sharper than you found it. But that is what came out, because the truth underneath it was you came, and I was not ready to say that to anyone, least of all him. His jaw moved once before he found words. I had forgotten he did that, the small mechanical hitch before he spoke, like a man checking that a bridge would hold his weight. "I was not looking for it," he said. "I have not been looking for 5 years." I told myself I was not looking. He stopped. And then I was 3 days into a border patrol I did not need to ride. And the wind changed, and my wolf, he did not finish. His wolf had done something he could not finish a sentence about. I knew the feeling. We were, in that, a matched pair. "Sit down." I gestured at the bench with an onion top, which was not how I had imagined commanding the strongest wolf alive, if I had ever let myself imagine it at all. "You look like the road." I did not invite him in. I am telling you that on purpose. I gestured at the bench by the garden wall, the one I had built for no one, and he crossed my yard and sat on it with the careful slowness of a large man in a small place. And I went on pulling onions, because my hands needed something to do that was not shaking. That is how it started. Not with the gate, with the onions. He stayed 3 days that first time, and we did not talk about anything that mattered, which is how I knew everything mattered. We talked about the cottage. He wanted to know how I had set the roof beam alone, and I told him I had not, the first time, that the first roof had come down in the night and I had laughed until I cried, sitting in the wreckage, and built it right the second time. He listened to that story the way other men listen to battle reports. We talked about the garden. He knew nothing about gardens. A king does not. But he asked which plant was which, with a seriousness that should have been funny and somehow was not. And when I told him the tall one with the purple flower was for fever, he repeated the name back to himself under his breath, committing it to memory, as though he might one day be far from a healer and glad to know. We did not talk about why I left. We did not talk about the 4 years I had spent in his hall as a healer's apprentice, learning every corridor and every face, learning the precise shape of being looked through. We did not talk about the night of the harvest moon. On the 3rd evening, he stood in my doorway. He never came inside. He asked once with his eyes, and I did not answer, and he never asked again. And he looked at my table, and his face did something I had never seen it do in 4 years of court. There were 2 chairs. "You set a place," he said. "I set a chair," I said. "It is not the same thing." He looked at me for a long moment, and I understood that he had heard the thing I had not said, which was that I had set it years ago, before I had any reason to think he would ever stand in this doorway, and that I had never once moved it. He lingered in the doorway a moment longer, and I thought he would say the thing his face was clearly building toward, and then he did not. Instead, he reached into the breast of his cloak and set something on the edge of my table, just inside the threshold he would not cross, and stepped back. It was a book. Small, leather-worn, soft at the corners, the kind a man carries until it stops being an object and becomes a habit. "You said the first roof came down in the night," he said, "and you laughed." He looked at the book and not at me. There is a chapter in there on setting a beam alone. I do not know if it is correct. I am not a builder. But I marked it, in case you ever build a 3rd roof, and I am not here to ask you which plant is which. I picked it up. The page he had marked was dog-eared, and then, beneath the dog-ear, underlined. Not the building chapter at all, but a single line 3 pages further on, about how a house holds the shape of the hands that made it. This is not the roof chapter. His jaw moved once. "No," he admitted. "I marked the wrong one. I have read it a great many times, and I still marked the wrong one." He pulled his cloak straight, a man retreating in good order. "Keep the book, regardless." I kept the book. I have it still. I never told him I found the 2nd underline, the one he did not mention, the one on the page about the kinds of silence a house can hold. "Some things you keep." "I will come back," he said. It was not a question. "I know," I said. And he did. Here is the part I cannot quite explain, even now. And if you have stayed with me this far, stay a little longer, because this is where I stopped understanding my own story and started living it. If you are enjoying her, subscribe and stay. I promise the part with the letters is worth it. He came back at the turn of every season. Spring, when the road thawed. High summer, dust on his boots. Autumn, with the first cold in the air. Winter, always winter, the hardest ride, the one a king had no business making. He never explained it. I never asked. We had built, without either of us proposing it, a thing that lived in the gaps between his visits, and to name it would have been to risk it. And we were both, I understood this slowly, people who had already lost enough things to careless naming. It was on his fourth visit, the second winter, that I found the first one. He had ridden in ahead of a storm, and the storm had won. And for the first time, he did not stand in my doorway and refuse to enter. He could not. The snow would have killed a lesser man, and I am not sentimental enough to let pride do what the cold could finish. I opened the door. He came in. He sat in the second chair, the one I had set for no one, and he filled it the way water fills a cup it was made for, and I did not look at that too closely. In the morning, while he slept by my banked fire like a felled tree, his saddlebag had fallen open. I am not a woman who goes through a guest's belongings, but a folded paper had slid half out onto my floor, and it had my name on it, in his hand, and a person can only be expected to do so much. It was a letter, dated the first winter I was gone, never sent. I did not read past my own name. I want that on the record. I read Wren in his careful, blocky king's hand, and I saw beneath it lines and lines of writing, and I folded it back and slid it into the bag and sat down in my own kitchen, with my heart doing something complicated. When he woke, I poured him the bitter tea he pretended to like, and I said, conversationally, to the fire, "How many are there?" He went very still. Soren did stillness the way mountains do it. "How many what?" "Letters." I kept my eyes on the fire. "With my name on them, that you did not send." The silence went on long enough that I thought he might lie, and I found I could not bear it if he lied, which told me something I was not ready to know. "One for every season," he said finally, "since you left." His hands were flat on my table. I did not know where to send them, and then I knew, this past summer, when I found this place. I had known for a while, I think, where you were. I let myself not know it. He looked at the fire instead of me. "I have written you a letter at the turn of every season for 2 years, and ridden out to a border I did not need, and never once let myself come to your door until the wolf made the choice for me. That is the kind of king I am. I can sign a death warrant without my hand shaking. I cannot knock on a healer's door. I have been told, by people who knew me in the hall, that I am difficult to surprise. They are correct. I sat in my kitchen and was surprised down to the soles of my feet. "Why did you not send them?" "Because a sent letter asks for an answer," he said, and I did not think I had earned one. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table, a thing he did when the words were hard. "You served 4 years in my hall, Wren, and I looked through you exactly as everyone else did, because looking at you was a thing I did not have permission to do. And then you were gone, and the hall was the same hall, and I could not be in it. This is the part I cannot explain. I had left because I was invisible. I had spent 5 years certain of it, certain enough to build a life on it like a foundation. And he had spent the same 5 years writing to the woman he had not been able to look at. We had been, all that time, 2 people standing in the same dark room, each certain they were alone in it. I should tell you about Ingrid, because she is the reason any of this nearly did not end the way it did. Lady Ingrid was the daughter of the Iron Territory's wealthiest banner house, and she had spent her whole life understanding, with the serene certainty of the very well-born, that she would be Luna. It was not vanity, it was arithmetic. Her bloodline, her father's swords, the king's need for the alliance, it all added up to a crown. And Ingrid was very good at arithmetic. She was the reason I had been invisible. I understood that now, the way you understand a chess game after it is lost. 5 years ago, when a healer's apprentice with no name had started to draw the king's eye in a way the king himself did not notice, it had been Lady Ingrid who arranged for that apprentice to be assigned to the far infirmary, the night shifts, the work that kept her out of the hall. It had been Ingrid, I would learn, who let a particular rumour breathe, that the apprentice was leaving, had spoken of leaving, was ungrateful and restless, and gone in spirit already. She had not pushed me out the gate. She had simply made the hall a place where leaving felt like the only choice I had made for myself in 4 years. And I had walked through her trap, thinking it was a door. She found out about the cottage in the 3rd year. Of course she did. Kings are watched, and a king who rides a pointless border patrol every season is watched harder. The first move she made, I did not see coming. Soren had brought me to the hall, openly, for the first time, for the spring convocation, the great gathering where the banner houses renew their oaths. He brought me as a guest, seated me in the lower hall, and did not announce what I was to him, because we had not yet found the word for it ourselves. I thought I was anonymous. I had spent 4 years being anonymous in that hall. I was an expert. Ingrid found me in the lower hall before the oaths began. "The healer's girl," she said, looking at me the way you look at a stain you thought you had removed. "I had heard you crawled off to die in the woods. How resourceful of you to merely hide there instead." "Lady Ingrid," I said. "He will tire of the novelty," she said, pleasantly, the way you would comment on weather. "A king who has tasted a banner house alliance does not subsist on cottage fare. You were forgettable enough the first time. Do not imagine the second showing improves the performance." She smiled. "I would leave tonight if I were you. Spare yourself the public version of being looked through. I understand you found it difficult enough in private." And here is what she did, the move I did not see. She had timed it. She said all of this where the wives of 3 banner houses could hear it, and she said it loud enough. And then she stepped back, so that the silence she had created had me at its centre, the woman from the woods, the king's embarrassment, and every eye in the lower hall turned to watch me absorb it. I will tell you honestly, it nearly worked. I felt the old invisibility close over my head like water. I felt 21 again. I felt the gate. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I have never been able to make my voice do what hers did, and I had stopped wishing I could. "You are right that he looked through me," I said, into the silence she had built for me. "For 4 years. I left because of it." I let that sit. But a woman who has been invisible learns to see. And what I see, Lady Ingrid, is that you have spent 5 years arranging a marriage to a man who has spent 5 years riding 3 days out of his way to sit in a garden. You did the arithmetic. You only forgot to ask him for the sum. I walked out of the lower hall. Not the gate this time. The front doors, in full view, my own choice, my own pace. I heard later that Ingrid did not speak again for the rest of the convocation. I am not above admitting that this pleased me. The second move was not a word. The second move nearly killed me. It was the following winter, the 5th winter, the one this whole story has been walking toward. Soren had ridden out to the cottage ahead of the long frost, and a fever had come into the border villages, the kind that takes the old and the young first. And I had gone with him back toward the hall, to help the healers, because I was a healer before I was anything to him, and I do not stop being what I am because a king is fond of me. Ingrid by then had run out of arithmetic. She had watched her certain future ride away on a border patrol 4 seasons running, and a woman who has built her whole life on a sum that no longer adds has only 2 choices, which are to accept the new total or to break the slate. She broke the slate. She came to the infirmary where I worked among the fever sick, and she came as a friend. That was the cruelty of it. Bearing wine for the healers who had not slept in 3 days, and I, exhausted past suspicion, nearly drank it. I had the cup in my hand. I had it at my lips. It was the smell that stopped me. Pine. Iron. Not him. The other pine. The false one. The scent of monkshood crushed and steeped, which a healer knows the way you know the face of an old enemy. Monkshood in wine smells almost like nothing. Almost. You have to have spent 4 years in a far infirmary learning the plants no one else bothers to learn to catch the almost. I set the cup down. My hand did shake then. I will not pretend otherwise. "Lady Ingrid," I said, to the woman watching me from the doorway with her certain, serene face. "You have steeped the wolfsbane too long. It has gone bitter. A guest might notice." I watched her understand that I had caught it. I watched the serenity go out of her face like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. What I did next, I did because I was a healer and because 3 other healers in that room had also been poured that wine and had not spent 4 years in a far infirmary. I did not run. I did not scream for the king. I took the cup and the jug, and I named what was in it, loudly, to the whole infirmary, so that no one else would lift a glass. And then the cost came, because she was not going to let herself be named without a fight. And Ingrid, who had run out of arithmetic, reached for the knife at a healer's tray. I put myself between it and the fever-sick who could not rise from their cots. The blade opened my forearm to the bone. I remember the cold of it more than the pain. A deep, driving cold, the way old iron is cold, the way the gate had been cold. I remember gripping the edge of the cot hard enough that the splinters bit my palm, blood from 2 places now, and thinking with absolute clarity, I did not build a cottage and learn the mushrooms and set a second chair to die on a hall floor for this woman's arithmetic. I stayed standing. That was the cost, and I paid it. I kept my body between the knife and the helpless until the guards Ingrid had not accounted for, because she had done arithmetic, not strategy, took her arms. Soren came through the infirmary doors at a dead run, having heard the noise from the great hall. He saw the blood. He saw the cup. He saw me, standing, grey-faced, holding my own arm together with my own hand, between his enemy and his dying villagers. I have never seen a man's face do what his did. The king went somewhere very far away behind his eyes, and what came back was not the king. He did not kill her. I want that recorded, because it is the most kingly thing I ever saw him do, and the most loving thing he ever did for me without touching me. He could have. The hall would have called it justice. His wolf, I think, was begging for it. I felt it through the bond that had grown between us without permission. A flare of white rage so total it stole the air from the room. But killing Ingrid would have made me a thing he avenged. And he had spent 5 years writing letters precisely so that I would never again be a thing that happened around him while he looked elsewhere. So he did it in front of the whole hall, with my blood still on the floor, while a healer bound my arm. He stripped Lady Ingrid of her name and her banner house standing, exiled her to the cold northern holdings, her father's swords forfeit to the crown, her certain future unmade, with 3 sentences in a voice that did not rise. And then, with the entire spring convocation watching, the assembled banner houses, the court that had looked through me for 4 years, he crossed the hall to where I sat, and he knelt. The strongest wolf alive went down on one knee in front of his entire kingdom, to a healer's apprentice with a bound arm and forest dirt that never quite came out from under her nails. "I have looked through you once," he said, and he did not lower his voice. He raised it so the back of the hall would hear. "I will not do it twice. I have written you a letter at the turn of every season because I was too much a coward to send one. I am done being a coward in a kingdom that requires me to be brave. About everything, except the one thing that matters. His jaw moved once, the small hitch, and then he steadied. Wren, stay. Not as a guest in the lower hall, as the woman whose chair has been empty at my table for 5 years, because I could not bring myself to fill it with anyone who was not you. The second chair. He had one too. Of course he did. I understood, kneeling height with the king of the Iron Territories, that we had each spent 5 years keeping a seat for someone we did not believe would ever come. I should tell you what broke open in me then, but I do not have the words for it, any more than he had words for what his wolf did when the wind changed. Something I had carried since the gate set itself down. Something I had been afraid to break. I kissed him in front of the whole court. It was not a long kiss, and it was not a soft one. It was 5 years of a sentence neither of us had been able to finish, finally finishing. When I pulled back, I said the only clever thing I managed in the whole of this story. You forgot to ask him for the sum, I said. So I am telling you. The sum is yes. The hall did not know what to do with itself. I have never enjoyed a silence more. We were mated under the next full moon, which the pack found scandalously fast, and I found roughly 5 years overdue. The court did not simply accept it. I want to be honest, there were banner houses who had backed Ingrid's arithmetic, and they sulked, and 2 of them tested the new Luna in small ways in the first months, a slight here, a closed door there. I had spent 4 years learning every corridor and every face in that hall as an invisible woman. It turns out that is an extraordinary education for a Luna. I knew where every body was buried because I had been the one nobody noticed walking past the graves. They stopped testing me by midsummer. The arm healed. The scar runs from wrist to elbow, pale and straight, and Soren cannot look at it without his jaw doing the small mechanical hitch, the bridge checking its own weight. I have told him to stop. He has not. I have decided to let him keep it, the way I kept the chair. We kept the cottage. This surprised the court more than the mating did, but on the turn of every season, spring thaw, high summer, first autumn cold, the hardest winter ride, the king of the Iron Territories and his Luna disappear from the hall for 3 days and ride west, to a badly built cottage on land no pack wanted, and we sit in a garden a Luna has no business weeding, and he asks me which plant is which, and I tell him, and he repeats the names back under his breath, as though he might one day be far from a healer and glad to know. This past winter, a letter came to the cottage. Not from him. From the far northern holdings, in a hand I recognised, Ingrid, older now, her certainty gone, asking nothing, only stating that she had heard the Luna had taken in her exiled younger cousin as a ward, and that she had not expected it, and did not understand it, and was grateful, in a stiff way that clearly cost her everything. I had taken the girl in. She was 11, and had Ingrid's serene certainty and none of her cruelty yet. And I had looked at her across the lower hall where she sat being invisible, and I had recognised the exact thing I had been, and I had not been able to walk past it. Soren found me reading the letter at our table, our real one, in the hall, with both chairs full now and a third pulled up for the girl. "Bad news?" he asked. "No," I said, and I set the letter down, and I looked at the 2 chairs that had finally found the people they had been waiting for, and the third that had made room. "Just arithmetic. Somebody finally got the sum right." He did not understand. I did not explain. Some things you keep. I left the pack on the night of the harvest moon without a word, and for 5 years I told myself leaving and giving up were the same thing. I was wrong. I had only ever been waiting, in a house I built with my own hands, with a chair I set for no one, to find out whether he would come. He came. That is the whole story, and it is the only one I have ever wanted to tell. Tell me, did you know, the morning the wind changed, that he would sit down? Or did you think, like I did, that if I just kept my back turned long enough, I could keep the quiet forever? Stay with me. Leave me a word below, and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if her voice has kept you company this far, subscribe and stay. There is always another season turning, and I have a great many of them left to tell you about. I had been to the mating auction twice before, and both times I had stood on the block long enough for the auctioneer to clear his throat, apologise to the hall with his eyes, and move on to the next girl. So I knew the shape of the silence before it arrived. I had learned to brace for it the way you brace for cold water. Not because it stops being cold, but because flinching only makes the rest of the room watch you do it. I was 23, a woman grown by every pack law that had ever been read aloud over my head, and old enough to know that the law and the room rarely agreed on what a woman was worth. The law said I could be bid on. The room had already decided I would not be. The scar did that. It ran from the left corner of my jaw, down the side of my throat, pale and ridged, the kind of mark a fire leaves when it has had time to think about it. I had stopped covering it years ago. Covering it had only ever made people more curious about what was underneath. And what was underneath was worse in their imagining than in the cold light of the auction hall, where 100 candles found it and held it up for everyone to see. The hall was the great receiving room of the Iron Court, and it had been built to make small people feel smaller. Black stone, a ceiling lost in smoke and shadow, iron sconces shaped like reaching hands. At the far end, raised on a dais, sat the wolf throne, and on it the Alpha King. I had never seen him before that night. Few of us had. He did not come down among the packs. He ruled the Iron Territories the way winter rules the north, which is to say, completely and from a distance, and without ever once explaining himself. He was not what the stories had made him. The stories made him enormous, a creature half-shifted at all times, teeth and fury. The man on the throne was only a man, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, grey threading the dark at his temples, though he could not have been past 35. He sat very still. He had the stillness of someone who had learned that every movement he made would be watched and weighed, and had decided, long ago, to give the watchers nothing. What I noticed, because noticing was the only thing I had ever been good at, was the chair beside him. It was empty. A second seat, smaller than the throne, set at his right hand where a Luna would sit. And over its back, folded with a care that did not match the iron severity of everything else in that room, lay a grey cloak. Wool, by the look of it, worn soft. It was the only thing in the entire hall that looked as though it had ever been touched gently. No one else seemed to see it. I could not stop seeing it. Edlin of the Riverlow pack, the auctioneer read, and I climbed the 3 steps onto the block, and the hall did the thing I knew it would do. It went quiet. Then it began, very softly, to laugh. Not all of it. Laughter in a room like that travels in currents. It started near the front, among the young nobles who had come to bid on the kind of girl who looked good standing behind a chair, and it moved backward through the hall like wind across a field, bending heads together, lifting hands to mouths. A woman near the dais laughed loudest. She was beautiful in the deliberate way of people who have made beauty their whole argument. Gold hair coiled high, a gown the deep red of a wound, a face arranged into delicate amusement. I would learn her name later, Lady Halvaig. That night, she was only the loudest voice in a room full of voices, and she said, not quite quietly enough, "Surely they don't expect a bid." The auctioneer cleared his throat. He looked at me with the apology I had seen twice before. He drew the breath that meant he was about to release the hall from the small discomfort of my existence and move on. "The bidding opens at everything." I want to tell you I understood what happened next. I did not. I am still, even now, working it out. The word came from the dais. It came from the Alpha King, who had not moved, whose hands still rested on the arms of the wolf throne, whose face had not changed at all. He had said one word, in a voice that was not loud, and the hall heard it the way you hear a branch break in a silent wood. "Everything," he said again, into the silence his first word had made. "The bid is everything I have. Name a higher one." No one did. You have to understand what that meant. An Alpha King does not bid at a mating auction. He claims. He chooses. The auction was a courtesy the crown extended to the lesser packs, a place for nobles to trade daughters and alliances, and the king attended the way a mountain attends the weather around it, present, indifferent, unmoved. He had never once bid, not for anyone. The beautiful women had been paraded before that throne for years, and the throne had looked at them the way it looked at the wall. And now he had emptied the treasury of his attention onto a scarred omega from a river pack that no one in that room could have found on a map. I looked at him. It was the wrong thing to do. You do not meet the eyes of the Alpha King. Every child of the packs learns that before they learn their own name. But I had spent my whole life being told where not to look, and I was tired, and I looked. He was already looking at me. Not at the scar. I had spent 6 years cataloguing the precise route a stranger's eyes took across my face. The flick to the jaw, the widening, the careful retreat to some safer feature. His eyes did not do that. They had found the scar, yes, but they had not flinched away from it, and they had not lingered on it with the wet curiosity I hated most. They had simply taken it in, the way you take in a thing you already knew was there, and moved on to my eyes, and stayed. I have been looked at as a horror. I have been looked at as a curiosity, a pity, a problem to be moved past. I had never, in 23 years, been looked at as though I were the answer to a question the looker had stopped expecting anyone to answer. It lasted perhaps 3 heartbeats. Then Lady Halvaig rose from her seat in a rustle of wine-dark silk and said, in a voice pitched to carry, "My king, the law requires the bid be verified. A girl of unknown blood cannot simply be claimed. The packs will want assurance she is what she says." And the Alpha King turned his head, slowly, and looked at her the way the throne had always looked at the wall. "Then verify her," he said. "Edelyn of Riverlow comes to the Iron Court. She will be examined by the Crown's own and proven free. Until then, she is under my protection, and the protection of the Crown is not a thing I extend twice." He stood. The whole hall moved, 100 people remembering at once to lower their eyes. "The auction is closed." He came down the steps of the dais. He did not come toward me. He crossed to the small chair at his right hand, and for one moment, before a servant swept forward to gather it, he laid his hand flat on the folded grey cloak draped over its back. Then he was gone through a door behind the throne, and I was standing on the block in a silent hall, and I had no idea, none at all, what had just been bought, or who, or why. I did not sleep that first night in the Iron Court. They gave me a room with a window and a fire and a bed wide enough for 3 of me, and I sat in the chair by the fire until the candle guttered, turning the evening over and over like a stone I was trying to read in the dark. Why me? The question had no flaw to it. I fell through every answer I tried to stand on. Not beauty. Lady Halvaig had been 3 paces away, gold and unmarked. Not blood. I was Riverpack, low and landless. Not pity. I knew pity. I had been raised on it, and what I had seen in his face was not pity. Pity looks away. He had not looked away. If you are still with me, stay a little longer. I promise you the part that comes next is the part I have never been able to explain to anyone, including myself. And if these scattered nights of mine are worth anything to you, you might consider walking the rest of the road with me. I will tell it as true as I can. In the morning, a steward came. He was old, narrow, dry as a reed, and his name was Osric, and he became, though neither of us would have admitted it for weeks, the first friend I made in that place.
"The king has instructed that you are to have the freedom of the keep," Osric said, in the tone of a man reading something he privately found absurd. "The library, the gardens, the kitchens, should you wish them. You are not a prisoner."
"Then I can leave," I said. He paused. "You can," he allowed. The king was specific. "If you wish to go, a horse and an escort to Riverlow will be provided, and the bid stands forfeit, and no word of reproach will follow you." He looked at me then, properly, and something behind the dryness shifted. "He wished you to know that first, before anything else, that the door is open." I thought about the empty chair, the cloak, the hand laid flat on the wool. "I'll stay," I said. "For now." I did not see the king for 4 days. I saw the shape of him everywhere, in the way the servants moved, the way the court arranged itself around an absence, the way a question would rise in a corridor and die the moment his name entered it. That the man himself stayed behind whatever doors he kept, and I was left to wander a fortress built to make me feel small, refusing, on principle, to feel it. I found the library on the 2nd day. It was the warmest room in the keep, which surprised me. I had expected the cold austerity of the rest, and instead found a low-ceilinged room thick with the smell of old leather and beeswax, a fire kept high, deep chairs worn at the arms. Someone used this room. Someone had made it the one place in that iron house where a body could be at ease. I found the cloak on the 3rd day. It was not in the library. It was in a small side chamber off the great hall, a room with a single chair and a single table, and on the table, a branch of candles always kept lit, and over the chair, the grey wool cloak I had seen at the auction. Up close it was older than I had thought, the hem worn to threads in places, mended once by a hand that had cared more for the keeping than the craft. A woman's cloak, too small for him. I did not touch it, but I stood in the doorway a long while, and I understood that I was standing in the one room in that fortress that meant something, and that I had not been told it existed, and that some part of the king had wanted me to find it on my own, or had not thought to forbid it because he had stopped imagining anyone would come this far down this particular corridor. "That room is not for you." I turned. Lady Halvaig stood at the end of the corridor, gold and unhurried, and the delicate amusement of the auction was gone from her face. What was underneath it was older and colder, and far more interesting. "I wasn't aware any room here was for me," I said. "I was told I had the freedom of the keep." You were told a great many things, I imagine. She came closer, and the smell of her perfume arrived before she did, something heavy and expensive. Do you know whose cloak that is? No, of course you don't. He didn't tell you. He doesn't tell anyone. She tilted her head. He hasn't said her name in 9 years. Not once. Not to the council, not to the priests, not to me. And I have been closer to him than you will ever be permitted to stand. He buried it so deep that the whole court agreed to pretend the grave was empty. Her smile returned, thin now. And then you climbed onto a block with a burn on your throat, and he spent his entire fortune in a single word. Do you understand what you are, girl? You are not chosen. You are a wound he is pressing on to see if it still hurts. It was a cruel thing to say, and it was said with great skill. And the worst of it was that I could not be certain she was wrong. What was her name? I asked. Halvaig's smile faltered, just slightly, just at one corner. I had asked the question she had built her whole speech to make me afraid to ask, and I had asked it plainly, and it was not the response she had rehearsed. That, she said, recovering, is not a thing you will live long enough in this court to learn. And she turned and went, gold and certain, and left me alone with the candles and the cloak, and a name no one in 9 years had been willing to say. I met him properly that night. I had gone back to the library. It had become my room more than my room had, and he was there, in the deep chair by the fire, a book open and unread on his knee, looking into the flames the way you look at something that is not there. He stood when he saw me. That too was wrong. Alpha Kings do not stand for Riverpack Omegas. I did not know the room was taken, I said. I'll go. Stay. It came out fast, before he had decided to say it. I watched it happen, watched the word leave him a half beat ahead of his own intention, and watched him absorb the fact that he had said it. He gestured, awkwardly, at the other chair. You like this room? It's the only warm one. Yes. Something moved at the edge of his mouth that on another man might have become the beginning of a smile. It always was. I sat. For a while neither of us spoke, and the fire did the work that fires do, and I found that the silence between us was not the bracing silence of the auction hall. It was a silence with room in it. You're wondering why, he said at last to the fire. Everyone's told me their version. Lady Halvaig was very thorough this afternoon. His hand tightened on the arm of the chair. What did she tell you? That I'm a wound you're pressing on to see if it still hurts. I kept my voice level. That you haven't said a certain name in 9 years. That I shouldn't go into the room with the cloak. He was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone very careful, each word set down like a man crossing ice. The cloak belonged to my sister. It was not what I had expected, and he saw that it was not, and something in him eased a fraction at having surprised me. Not a lost mate, he said. Everyone assumes a lost mate. It is a tidier grief, and the court prefers tidy things. He turned the unread book over in his hands. My sister was younger than me. When our father died and the territories fractured, there were those who thought a boy king could be unmade if enough of his family died first. There was a fire. His thumb moved along the book's edge. She got the others out. 3 pups and an old woman, out a window, into the snow. She did not get herself out. By the time I reached the room, there was nothing to reach. I did not say I was sorry. People had said they were sorry to me my whole life, and it had never once helped. I said, instead, the true thing. The scar, I said. My hand rose to my throat before I told it to. You looked at it like you knew it. I have spent 9 years, he said, imagining the marks fire leaves. I did not have to imagine yours. He looked at me then, fully, the way he had in the hall. When the auctioneer called your name, and you climbed onto that block, and the whole room did what that room always does, I did not see a girl to be pitied, or claimed, or proven. I saw someone who had walked out of the thing that took her, and was still standing, and had stopped apologising for being alive to do it. His jaw moved once before he found the rest. I have never managed the not apologising. I thought, perhaps, you might teach me how it is done. I have been looked at as a horror and a curiosity and a problem. He had just told me, in the plainest words anyone had ever used with me, that he had bid everything because I had survived, not despite the scar, because of what it meant that I wore it openly. Her name, I said softly. You don't have to say it, but you should be allowed to. 9 years is a long time to hold your breath. He did not say it, but he looked at me as though I had handed him something he had not known he was permitted to want. And across the warm room, the distance between our 2 chairs felt, for the first time, like a thing that might one day be allowed to close. The court noticed before we did. That is the way of courts. They watch the king the way sailors watch the sky, and they had seen the king come to the library 4 nights running, and they had seen the scarred girl come too, and the arithmetic of it ran through the corridors faster than either of us could have stopped it. Lady Helvaig made her second move on the night of the Frost Court, the great winter gathering, the whole nobility of the Iron Territories packed into the Black Hall, and me at the edge of it in a borrowed gown, trying to take up as little of the world as I could. It happened on the gallery stair. I had gone up to escape the press of the hall, to find a window and a breath of cold air, and the stone of the upper gallery was old, and the stair was steep, and when the hand met my back between my shoulders, it did not press. It shoved, hard, a single committed thrust at the top of a long fall. I have fast hands. 6 years of being the one who catches things in a busy Croft kitchen had given me that, if nothing else. My hand found the iron rail and closed on it, and the cold bit and the wrench of my whole weight coming up short tore something in my shoulder, but I did not go down the stair. I hung there, both hands locked on the rail, heart slamming, and when I got my feet back under me and turned, the gallery was empty except for the trailing edge of a wine-dark gown vanishing through a far door. I did not cry out. I want you to know that. I stood on that stair with a wrenched shoulder and a heart trying to climb out of my throat, and I made myself breathe, and I made myself think. And the thought I had was very clear and very cold. She will say I fell. She will say the scarred girl was clumsy on the stairs, and the court will believe it, because the court would rather believe anything than that one of its own had tried to commit murder over a man's attention. So I did not give her a fool to point to. I went back down into the hall. I walked the length of it with my wrenched shoulder held straight and my chin level, and the borrowed gown unmarked. And I went to where the king stood among his council, and into a lull in the talk I said, clearly enough for the nearest dozen to hear, "My king, someone has just tried to put me down the gallery stair, a hand in my back, at the top. I'd have gone the whole way if I were any slower." I held his eyes. I thought you should hear it from me, standing up, rather than from someone else, lying down. The hall went silent, the way it had gone silent at the auction, and the king, who had not in 9 years raised his voice in that hall, who ruled by stillness and distance, went, very quietly, very completely still in a different way. The kind of stillness that comes before, not after.
"Who was near her on the stair?" he said. Not loud. It did not need to be. No one answered, but 100 faces turned, the way faces do, toward the one face that had gone the particular shade of white that guilt goes, and Lady Halvake stood among the council in her wine-dark gown, and for one instant before she rearranged it, her face told the whole room the truth. "She fell," Halvake said. "The girl is unsteady. Everyone has seen." "She is standing," the king said, "in front of all of you. Does she look unsteady?" He let that sit. "You will be confined to your apartments until the Crown's justice has heard this. If she had gone down that stair, Lady Halvake, I would be holding a different kind of court tonight, and you would not enjoy your place in it." It should have ended there. It did not. Because I had made an error, and the error was thinking the danger was a person, when the danger was a man's 9 years of held breath, and what it would cost to let it out. He came to me after, in the small room with the candles and the cloak. I had gone there without deciding to. My feet had simply taken me. He found me standing where I had stood the first day, an arm's length from his sister's cloak, my wrenched shoulder beginning to stiffen and burn. "You're hurt," he said. "I've been hurt worse. I'm still standing." "Yes." He came into the room, and for a moment he looked not at me, but at the cloak, and I watched the held breath of 9 years rise up in him all at once, the way grief does when something cracks the seal on it. "I should send you back to Riverlow," he said, and his voice had gone rough. "Tonight, with the horse and the escort and the open door. Halvake is one of a dozen. They will not stop. I bid everything for you, and the only thing I have actually done is paint a mark on your back for every ambitious house in these territories to aim at. I cannot." His hand had risen toward the cloak and stopped, shaking in the air above it. "I could not get her out of that room. I will not stand in another one and fail to get someone out." And there it was, the cost. Not a curse, not magic, just a man who had decided that the safest thing he could do for the people he loved was to let them go before grief could find them, and who was about to do it to me, gently, for my own good, while it tore the heart out of both of us. I could have let him. The open door had been open the whole time. I could have taken the horse and gone back to the Croft kitchen and the laughter I knew the shape of, and been safe, and been small, and spent the rest of my life knowing I had been looked at once as though I were the answer, and had run from the question. Instead, I did the thing that cost me. I crossed the room. He flinched, as though my coming toward him were the dangerous thing, and I took up his sister's cloak from the back of the chair. The pin that held it folded was old iron, worn to a point at one edge, and when my hand closed hard around the wool, it bit into my palm, and I let it, and I held the cloak out between us. "Say her name," I said. "Edeline." "You got 3 pups and an old woman out a window into the snow." The iron pin had broken my skin. I felt the warmth of it against my fingers and did not loosen my grip. She didn't fail to get out. She chose. She spent herself getting 4 people through a window because that was the last thing she could do. And you have spent 9 years calling her choice your failure. And you have never once said her name out loud, because saying it would mean she was real and not just the wound you keep pressing. My own voice cracked. I let it. "I am not going back to Riverlow. I am not a mark on your back. I am standing in front of you with your sister's cloak in my bleeding hand, telling you that you do not get to give me away to keep me safe. Now say her name. Say it. I'll be standing right here when you do."
He looked at the cloak. He looked at my hand closed bloody around it. He looked at me. And the held breath of 9 years went out of him, and he said, in a voice I had to lean in to hear, a name. A small, plain, ordinary name, the kind a younger sister has. He said it once, and then he said it again, steadier, and the second time it did not break him. It set something down. I saw it leave his shoulders. I saw 9 years of a man holding a door shut against his own grief, finally, carefully, let the door swing open, and find that what was behind it was not a fire, but a girl who had loved him enough to climb out a window last. He did not reach for me. He reached for the cloak, our hands together on the worn grey wool, my blood on the iron pin, his grief finally with a name to wear. And we stood there a long time, the two of us, holding the one soft thing in that iron house between us, and letting it be held. The kiss came later, and it was not the point, and I will only tell you that when it came, it felt less like a beginning than like the moment a held breath is finally, fully released. That everything in me that had braced for the cold of being unwanted simply, at last, stopped bracing. Lady Halveg did not see another frost court. The Crown's justice heard the matter, and the gallery stair had been seen after all, by old Osric, who had a steward's habit of being unregarded in corners, and who testified in his dry reed of a voice that he had watched Lady Halveg set her hand between my shoulders and push. She was stripped of her lands and her title, and sent north past the edge of the Iron Territories, to a cold holding where ambition has nothing to climb, and the dozen houses who had thought to aim at the mark on my back watched her go and quietly found other plans. The verification the law required was done, and I was proven free, and the matter of a river pack Omega standing where a Luna stands was settled by the simple fact that the Alpha King had, for the first time in the memory of anyone living, looked at his court and dared it to object. The court, having seen what stillness in him meant, did not. We were claimed in the spring. I will not pretend the whole of the Iron Territories rejoiced. A court does not turn warm in a single season, and there were houses that smiled at me with their mouths and counted my scar with their eyes for a long while after. But the king placed the Luna's circlet on my head himself, in the black hall, in front of all of them, and when he did, he spoke his sister's name aloud as a blessing over the joining. The second time the court had heard it in 9 years. And the first time it had been said as a thing to live beside, rather than a wound to hide. And there was not a sound in that hall but the fire. It is a year now since the auction. The small room off the great hall is still there, and the candles are still kept lit. But the cloak is not over the chair anymore. We moved it. It hangs now in our own chambers, folded with the same care, where I can see it from the bed. Because a thing you love should be kept where the living are, my husband says, and not shut away in a room you visit like a grave. He says her name easily now. He says it the way you say the name of someone who would have liked you. He thinks she would have liked me. I think she would have laughed at him, gently, for taking 9 years to learn what his own wolf knew in a single word across a crowded hall. I still have the scar, of course. Scars do not go anywhere. But I have stopped being able to remember, most days, that it is supposed to be the most interesting thing about me. Because in this house, no one looks at it that way. And you forget, eventually, the shape of a silence you have stopped having to brace for. They laughed when I walked out onto that block. They stopped when he stood up. I have wondered this whole year what the stories will make of it. The Alpha King who spent everything on a scarred girl from a river pack and could not, when pressed, explain why. I could explain it now. But some things are better kept where the living are, and not held up for everyone to see. So I will only tell you this, and then I will let you go. He did not bid on me because I was beautiful, or unmarked, or safe. He bid because I had walked out of the fire and stopped apologizing for it. And the funny thing, the thing I still cannot quite get over, is that all that time, I thought I was the one who had survived something. Tell me, did you see it coming? What the cloak was?
Or did you think, like I did, that it was a lost love he was hiding? Stay and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and what you would have done on that block when the whole room began to laugh. And if her side of the story is the side you want to keep hearing, stay with me. There are more of us than you'd think. The ones who walked out and stopped apologizing. I'll keep telling them as long as you keep listening.